You know, say what you will about the Secrets of Magic Playtest, I can guarantee you one thing. The Magus is going to have the best combat music of any of the core classes in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Oh, sorry, wrong Magus. Today, let's talk about the Secrets of Magic Playtest on this episode of the Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello everyone, my name is Mark and I am the Local Disaster Tour Guide. That's right, I'm a storyteller who sees no possible negative consequences of allowing Gish builds into fantasy role-playing. Welcome to my channel where we talk about role-playing games like Pathfinder and Starfinder. Today I'm going to be doing a short video on the Secrets of Magic Playtest that is currently wrapping up for Paizo Publishing. Paizo has announced that next year they're going to be releasing a hardcover book for Pathfinder 2nd Edition called The Secrets of Magic. And in that book, they're going to be releasing two new core classes, the Magus or Magus and the Summoner. Currently, we are in the last week of the Secrets of Magic playtest. Paizo put rough cut versions of both the Magus and Summoner out for the public to use and playtest, throw into a game, see how it performs, and provide feedback so that they can fine-tune the final results and help ensure that they have a high-quality product when the book is released next year. Now, I will be honest, I tried to do a video on the Secrets of Magic playtest when it first came out, and I recorded that video like 4 different times. I kept trying to do it, it wasn't coming together, and eventually what I realized is the reason that the video wasn't coming together is I hadn't actually playtested any of the material in the Secrets of Magic playtest, so ultimately I scrapped my previous video and I decided first I wanted to do some playtest with the classes, and then I was going to do a video offering my thoughts on the Magus, on the Summoner, and where I think they stand now and where I might like Paizo to go with the final product. My strategy for the playtest was fairly simple. I am currently running a group through the Age of Ashes adventure path, and we are currently in book 1 of that adventure path. So I decided what I was going to do is I was going to take 2 of the NPCs from this particular adventure path, roll them up as a Magus and a Summoner respectively, and allow my players to control these characters during chapters 3 and 4 of this particular adventure. Now obviously, if you have not played this adventure yet and you want to avoid spoilers for the Age of Ashes adventure path, you may want to skip this video, but I want to talk a little bit about how that went and give you some of my thoughts on the Magus and the Summoner and how they performed in actual play. So let's get started. Really quick, I'd like to talk about what the Magus and the Summoner are, and talk about a few of the options that are available. This is going to be a very generic introduction to the Magus and the Summoner. If you want a deeper dive into what Paizo has put out, I'm going to throw a link to the Secrets of Magic playtest down in the description, where you can actually download the document and do a more serious read-through for yourself. But the Magus and the Summoner are both classes that were in Pathfinder 1st Edition that are being brought forward to Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Both of these classes are going to be spellcasting classes, although both of these classes are unique as spellcasting classes in that they have a very limited amount of spells. Like any other spellcasting class, the Magus and the Summoner are both going to have cantrips which are usable over and over again, but when it comes to actual spell slots, the Magus and the Summoner are going to cap out at 4 spell slots. These spell slots do increase in power throughout the character progression, but when the Magus and the Summoner get new, higher level spell slots, some of their older spell slots fall away. As such, the Magus and the Summoner end up with a very limited selection of powerful spells actually at their disposal. The Magus is what a lot of gamers refer to as a Gish class. Gish is an old slang term for a hybrid of a martial class and a caster class. And I'll go ahead and say Gish classes have a history in previous versions of Pathfinder, Dungeons & Dragons, and other fantasy role-playing games of being unbalanced. Sometimes they're overpowered, sometimes they're underpowered, but frequently it is fair to say that Gish classes struggle to feel on par with other character options available in a normal role-playing game. The Summoner class is different. It focuses on an Eidolon, which is a unique magical creature that has bonded to the Summoner, and the Summoner calls this Eidolon into battle to aid them whenever they are in danger. Now, in regards to the magic of both classes, the Magus is keeping with its Pathfinder 1st Edition roots, and it is going to be an arcane spellcasting tradition class. The Summoner, however, is going to be opening up into a wider variety of options in 2nd Edition. In the playtest, the Summoner has access to all 4 spellcasting traditions: Arcane, Divine, Occult, and Primal. The Summoner ultimately will determine what kind of spellcasting tradition they use based on the type of Eidolon that they have. Now, my initial reactions to both of these classes were very different. Historically, I have not liked Gish classes. They have always felt unbalanced to me, and often they have felt overpowered. Magus was a class in 1st Edition that I complained about on more than one occasion, and when Paizo announced that they intended to bring the Magus forward into 2nd Edition, I was extremely hesitant. I was not happy. I didn't want to hear that. I like the way multi-classing archetypes have worked in 2nd Edition, and I thought if you wanted to blend arcane and martial combat together, I thought that there were already tools in place to do that reasonably well. So the announcement of the Magus is one that I met with a lot of trepidation. I was not happy to hear that the Magus was going to be showing up. As for the Summoner, well, that's a class I was extremely excited to hear about. There were more than a few Summoner characters that I wanted to play in Pathfinder 1st Edition, but sadly I'm a forever DM, so I never really got to dig into the class like I wanted to. But it was always a class that appealed to me. I loved that concept of, I'm going to design my own monster, and I can make it be whatever I wanted it to be. The Summoner was a class that just really spoke to my creativity and really just inspired a lot of ideas for me as a gamer. And I will say that Paizo's decision to take the Summoner from being a single spellcasting tradition and opening it up so it can potentially be all 4 spellcasting traditions, that was something I was extremely excited about. I didn't see that coming, but it made so much sense, and now the variety of options available, it just, I love it. So my initial reaction to both of the classes were very, very different. The Magus, based on past history, I was very hesitant. The Summoner, based on past history and some early things I heard about the Summoner, was really, really appealing. So these two classes started out in very different positions for me, and it's been interesting to kind of observe how my thoughts on these classes have changed as I've progressed through the actual playtest. Now, before I get into the actual results at my gaming table, I do want to say this. I did not get to do the full extent of playtesting that I wanted to do before the playtest ended. My hope is to have this video up at least a couple of days before the official playtest is over. And right now my party is on the tail end of Chapter 3. We didn't get to Chapter 4, and I intended to do the playtest during Chapters 3 and 4 of the first book of Age of Ashes. So that means that some of the results I'm about to talk about are definitely incomplete, but I wanted to put the results that I had out there since I know that the official playtest is wrapping up. So now I want to talk about how I did the playtest at my gaming table. And as I mentioned earlier, I took the first book of Age of Ashes and I took NPCs from the first book. I took one of them and rolled them up as a Magus. I took another and rolled them up as a primal spellcasting summoner, and my intention was to give these characters to different players at my gaming table, one at a time, and allow my players to use the characters and see how they performed. For the Magus, I took the Order of the Nail Initiate, Alex Stegrum, and I switched him from the fighter that is presented in the actual adventure path to a Sustaining Steel Magus. For those of you who are curious, the Magus has 3 subclasses: the Shooting Star or Ranged Combat Magus, the Slide Casting or One-Handed Combat Magus, and the Sustaining Steel Magus, which focuses on huge two-handed weapons. And I'm going to be honest, the Sustaining Steel Magus felt like a really good fit for the character of Alex Stegrum in this story. When I was rolling up Alec and translating him from a fighter to a Magus, I found that it translated reasonably well. Yes, he lost some of the advanced combat proficiencies of the fighter, but overall he still ended up feeling like a very solid and effective martial character. When I was rolling up the Magus for the party to use, I found that the Magus was very easy to make, very quick to put on paper. Character creation went very smoothly, and I really enjoyed character creation for the Magus. I felt like the character did what I wanted it to do. I felt like the character represented what I wanted it to represent. The actual character creation process for the Magus was extremely positive, and I intended for the Magus to be used by my party during Chapter 3 of Book 1 of Age of Ashes. As for the Summoner, my intention was to use them in Chapter 4 of Book 1 in Age of Ashes, and the character that got a little bit of a rewrite for the Summoner was Warble Bumblebrasher, the Goblin Envoy. Now, I did have to toy with the storyline just a little bit here. Warble was the Bumblebrasher envoy for the Bumblebrasher goblins to the town of Breach Hill, and I modified her storyline a little bit so that when she actually lived with the goblins, she was one of the people who helped protect the tribe by calling a beast eidolon in the form of a giant bear named Big Bumble. For those of you who have read through Chapter 3 of Age of Ashes, you know that the goblin tribe actually has a badly tamed bear named Big Bumble barricaded in part of the dungeon that the party goes through. So the slight change to the story that I made is, after Warble moved to the town of Breach Hill, the goblins felt like they needed a new Big Bumble, and so they just went out into the woods, found the first bear that they could, and tried to force it into the dungeon. The goblins, of course, didn't understand that Warble was able to control her bear because it wasn't a normal bear. With that minor change in place, I was able to justify giving Warble primal spellcasting and offering her as an NPC character to take along on their adventures in Chapter 4. As I mentioned a moment ago, my party has not actually gotten to Chapter 4 yet. We are hoping to start in about a week and a half. So unfortunately, I don't have any playtest data for the Summoner itself, but I can talk a little bit about the Summoner character creation, which unfortunately was not as positive an experience as the Magus was. When I went into creating the Magus, as I said, I found the Magus to be very intuitive, very easy to create. As someone who is very familiar with the Pathfinder 2nd Edition character creation system, I was able to roll up Alex Stegrum as a Magus like that. It went very smoothly, it felt like a fantastic fit, but for Warble Bumblebrasher, when I tried to roll her up as a Summoner, it stalled, is the best way I know how to describe this. At first, character creation was going very smoothly. I knew what I wanted, I knew how I wanted things to play out for her, so when I was creating her as a primal summoner, the first, I would say, about 2/3 of character creation went smoothly. But then suddenly, there was this distinct point where everything just kind of stopped, and I wasn't sure what to do next. And I've only made one summoner. I obviously haven't had a lot of time with this playtest, so I'm not exactly sure what it was that caused confusion, but I know just all of a sudden there was this distinct moment where the summoner was suddenly less fun to create. Now, I did force my way through the character creation process. I did eventually work through the kinks, And the final character that I created, I felt was very on target for what I was trying to do. I felt like it was well done. I was happy with the final result, but I can definitely say between the two classes, when you look at character creation, Magus goes a lot smoother than Summoner does. I think it may be that Summoner just has more options, and there comes a point where those options are a little bit overwhelming. I wish I had the opportunity to create multiple Summoners so that I could talk about this a little bit more, but I just do know there was a very distinct difference in the feel between creating a Magus and creating a Summoner. Both of them turned out well, but one of them definitely went a lot smoother. Now in Chapter 3 of Book 1 in Age of Ashes, the party gets sent down into the basement level of Citadel Altarane, where they are trying to investigate the Cinderclaw cult, and they are trying to find Alex Stagrom's family signet ring. Alex Stagrom was a natural fit for this portion of the story because the party was already going to be looking for his ring anyways, so it just felt natural to let him join the party for this particular part of the adventure. And the early results for Alec, or the Magus that I had added to my party, were almost really tragic. One of the creatures, and one of the most dangerous creatures that you can encounter in that particular dungeon, is a soul-bound doll who proceeded to attack Alex Stagrom with a powerful spell as its first action and roll a natural 20. It was a critical hit on a brutal spell, and the soulbound doll rolled almost max damage, so the party Magus almost dropped in the second fight of the dungeon. Just down. Now, to be fair to the Magus, almost any party member would have been in really bad shape if they had taken a hit from that spell. It was a critical hit, it was an almost roll. Anyone would be in trouble. In fact, that fight was so brutal for the party as a whole that they actually had to leave the dungeon, spend a lot of time resting and recovering, and then try to return, which ultimately cost the party a lot of time exploring the basement of Citadel Altarane. That is part of the reason that my party didn't get as far in the playtest as I was hoping they would. But thankfully, in the latter parts of that dungeon, I did get to see Alex Stagrom used a little bit more. I got to see the Magus class in play a little bit more. And I can solidly say that the Magus is an absolutely fantastic martial character. One of the things I will say, just from a casual reading of the Magus playtest class, there is definitely a subclass of Magus that feels like it's the top tier subclass, and that's the Slidecaster Magus. Shooting Star feels okay. The Sustaining Steel Magus, however, feels weak when you read it. Magus as a whole, if you look at the online conversations, there's a lot of commentary that the Magus action economy feels off, and the Sustaining Steel Magus, the two-handed warrior Magus, I would definitely say feels that the most. The player who was controlling the Magus throughout that adventure almost never used Spell Strike. I think through the course of the entire dungeon, Spell Strike may have been used twice and only hit once, which really isn't a lot of data points for the core of the Magus class. Instead, what usually happened is the optimal action economy for the Magus was just go swinging with the greatsword. There's no need to cast a spell here. I am more likely to do damage and more likely to get where I need to get if I just make normal attacks. So there were very few instances where Spell Strike actually came into play, and the Magus just kind of ended up feeling like a regular old martial character. Now, there is good and there is bad in what I just described. The good is this: the Magus felt perfectly balanced with the rest of the party. This is the first time, granted, in a relatively short window, but this is the first time I can really say that I have seen a Gish-style character in a game where I have never had a point where I was just like, oh man, this character does not feel like he's on par with the rest of the party. I've seen Gishes be overpowered, I've seen Gishes be underpowered. In this case, I basically just had another warrior in the party who was about where everyone else was, and occasionally they threw out a cantrip spell. The balance feels good at the moment. But it is really, really problematic to say that the Magus almost never used their spell strike. That's the core of the class. If you're rolling a Magus, you're rolling a Magus because you want to combine martial and magic into one attack. That's kind of the main feature of the class. And the main feature of the class really wasn't practical in most of the adventure that I actually played the Magus through. And a particularly distressing part of this is my party is not what you would call stealthy, so they actually ended up getting swarmed by boggards and charukai in that basement. There was a particular encounter where the party was being overrun by a number of enemies. It was, to be honest, a target-rich environment. And despite the fact it was a target-rich environment, the optimal action economy for the Magus still defaulted to regular melee strikes. Again, the character felt balanced. The Magus did well in that encounter, but it just feels wrong that in a situation where action economy is not as big of a concern, a sustaining steel Magus still felt like it shouldn't bother with spell strike. Now, real quick, I do want to offer some player commentary. My player would agree with much of what I've said from my conversations with him. When I rolled up the Magus, I deliberately gave the Magus to one of my players who is a very strong role player, but who has in the past said, and I quote, "Magic makes my head hurt." I kind of wanted to see how well someone who typically stays away from magic characters would respond to a class that blended martial and magic concepts. In the first session that he was controlling the Magus, he definitely had some trouble understanding how spell strike worked. I had to explain spell strike several times. We had to talk about the action economy of spell strike on several occasions. He definitely had a little bit of a learning curve trying to figure out how a sustaining steel Magus was supposed to be played. Then life happened. And we were not able to meet for 2 whole weeks. That's another reason we didn't get very far in this playtest. But after 2 whole weeks, we came back and I noticed that my player instantly remembered how the Magus worked and how spell strike worked. And I actually thought that was a very positive thing. There was a pretty significant gap. We missed 2 weeks worth of games because sometimes life just happens. And yet, when my player came back, he remembered how it worked, he used it very effectively, he modified his tactics very successfully in that second game, and that really told me that while there is an initial learning curve to Magus, once you get it, you got it. So I will give Paizo credit for this. While it is a little bit hard to understand at first, once you wrap your mind around the Magus and spell strike and how their action economy works, it sticks with you. Now, unfortunately, my party has not yet made it to Chapter 4, so I have no actual play data from using a summoner during the playtest. And I kind of feel bad about that because, like I said, Summoner is one of those classes that I was really excited about. In fact, the Summoner has absorbed elements from another first edition class, the Spiritualist, which was another class I loved. And so seeing these two classes brought together and elements of these two classes being melded together, I was really excited. I'm still going to use the Summoner playtest when my party gets to Chapter 4. I just won't be able to put out any useful information in terms of playtest data. But I really wanted to see how the Summoner was going to play, because right now, I don't know how it actually works out in-game. On casual observation, this is solely me reading through the Summoner as Paizo has published it. I do have a couple of concerns. Now, the first one I feel like is probably going to be fixed in Secrets of Magic. Right now, it feels like all of the flavor of the Summoner class has been loaded entirely on the Eidolon, and almost none of it exists for the Summoner themselves. Now, this is a playtest, so I understand right now Paizo has to get the mechanics right. It's about the math right now, so I feel like the flavorful stuff is probably going to be addressed between now and the actual publication of Secrets of Magic. But right now, there is a distinct imbalance between flavor for the Eidolon and flavor for the Summoner, and it feels kind of bad because the Eidolon can be really, really cool and really, really thematic, and then the Summoner just kind of feels like an overglorified meat taxi for the Eidolon. I would like to see some more options available to help define the Summoner half of the Summoner Eidolon pair, because your Summoner should still be a character. The other part of this coin, and this is the portion that's a little bit more concerning for me, is most of the Eidolon's advancement is done through class feats. Now, I suspect there are a lot of mathematical, game balance reasons why that happened, but right now I am very concerned that the Eidolon is going to eat up too much of the Summoner class feats, to the point that it's not just going to be an imbalance of flavor, but it's actually going to be an imbalance of mechanic. There are some levels for the Summoner class where every single class feat is nothing but Eidolon options. And it is perfectly possible to create a Summoner who every single class feat they take has nothing but choices for the Eidolon, creating what I feel like is going to be a massive imbalance between the power and function of the Eidolon and the power and function of the Summoner. Remember, the Summoner, yes, they have cantrips, but they only have 4 spell slots. So ultimately, the Summoner is going to be very, very limited, and the Eidolon is eating up all of the class feats. I feel like the Summoner runs the risk of not being able to contribute meaningfully during play, during actual combat. Again, this is casual read-through. I don't know that for sure, but in my mind, I compare it to the Animal Companion for Rangers. An Animal Companion, if you really want to go all in on an Animal Companion for a Ranger, you can burn 6 or 7 class feats on an Animal Companion, but honestly, I feel like most people who use an Animal Companion, they're probably going to burn 5 of their class feats at most, out of 11 for the Ranger. Looking over at the Summoner, I feel like at the bare minimum, you're going to end up with 8 or 9 class feats being burned on the Eidolon, possibly even all 10. And that, to me, is kind of a painful unbalance. A Ranger is probably going to use about half of their class feats to flesh out an important part of their character, whereas the Summoner is probably going to use all or the vast majority of their class feats to do the same. I don't know how to balance this correctly, and I hope that Paizo can figure out the math here, but I really would like to see some of the class feats being pulled away from the Eidolon and being used to expand the Summoner half of this team, because right now only one half of the team looks like it has enough mechanical impact to be serious at the gaming table. But again, on the Summoner, that is casual read-through, no actual play. I wish my group had been able to get far enough to do that. So those comments definitely take with a grain of salt, because I haven't been able to field test the Summoner properly. I will say, in regards to my players and their thoughts on the Summoner, that there were 2 different players who showed an active interest in playing the Summoner, so there is definitely a lot of interest in the class. I don't know how well they would have reacted to playing the class, but I can definitely say that the interest is there. So at the end of the playtest, I find myself in a bit of a weird position on the Magus and Summoner. Magus is a class where I had a lot of initial hesitation, but I saw a lot of interesting options, a lot of interesting concepts. I enjoyed the character creation process, and right now it does feel balanced. So with Magus, I had a lot of initial hesitation, but Paizo is showing me some good stuff. I don't know if they can get the action economy of Spellstrike right, but if they do, I think it could be a very good class. Meanwhile, with Summoner, I had a lot of initial excitement, but as I've gone through character creation, it was kind of a rough process, and when I look at the imbalance of the flavor and mechanics of the Summoner versus the Eidolon, I end up worrying that the class is not going to be as compelling to play. It's weird. The classes started in a different place, and it feels like they've gone on very different trajectories throughout this playtest. But those were my thoughts and experiences. Now let me throw it over to you. Have you had an opportunity to participate in the Secrets of Magic Playtest for Pathfinder 2nd Edition? Have you tried the Magus or the Summoner at your table? If so, what were your experiences? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, like it and share it. Subscribe to the channel. Thank you for being a part of this conversation, and have a wonderful day. Hello everyone, Mark here. I have a quick update for the channel. I wanted to take a few minutes and let you know that this channel is going to be going quiet for a couple of weeks. I'm going to be taking about 2 weeks off. October is my anniversary month, and this year, for the first time since my wife and I have been married, we actually have an opportunity to do a little bit of travel for our anniversary. Now, don't worry, we are going to be taking some precautions. We've got a newborn, so we know we've got to be careful with COVID-19 and everything. We're going to be in state, and we're going to be going to a place where we're going to be able to social distance. So we are definitely being as safe as we can in taking some time off for our anniversary. But I just wanted to let you guys know that this channel will be quiet for 2 weeks. However, we will be back, and we will be back on Halloween with the next episode of Crafting Your Campaign, where we will be talking most appropriately about villains. So definitely stick around to keep your eyes out for that video. Looking ahead into November, there are several things that are being edited and worked on right now. I've got a local disaster tour guide reviews covering the Pathfinder and Starfinder Pawns products. I'm going to be releasing my first character build that makes use of character options from the Advanced Player's Guide, the Ether Thief. And I am excited to announce that my first collaborative video is now officially coming together. That's something that's been in the works for a while, and I am excited to get that out to you all. And don't worry, I haven't forgotten about the local disaster tour guide reviews Starfinder. I have been working on those scripts. It's been hard to find a good place to put them into the video schedule, but that is going to be coming as well. Still, for the next couple of weeks, I will not be posting any new videos. I'm going to be taking some time to celebrate my anniversary with my wife, but don't worry, we will be back on Halloween, and I look forward to seeing you then. And since this is a post-credits scene, don't forget, look for opportunities to volunteer and be a blessing to those around you. Have a wonderful day.